Okay, these days a lot of artwork is actually scanned into computers, and a lot of artists, like myself, we still draw in a kind of traditional way, but the finished product is kind of often scanned into a computer and cleaned up and then coloured. For me, I often do that as well, but I also kind of do something like the speech balloons. I kind of draw them by hand, the actual balloon, but then when I come to do the final artwork, I'll use something like Photoshop or Illustrator to kind of type in the text, which is kind of a good way in some ways of having a really neat kind of lettering font. In the past I used to do it all by hand, which was fine, but it used to take quite a long time, and these days with various programs you can just have a script already in your computer and just kind of cut and paste into the artwork. And it's a kind of good way of kind of making it kind of neater, and also if anyone wants changes or they want things altered, it's kind of an easier way to do it. And this particular story is a story called Eddie's Id, and it's all about this kid that lives with these really bad nightmares that no one else really understands. Then one day, after years of suffering, the nightmares disappear, and he thinks everything's okay. But those nightmares actually come into the real world, and that's where things really start to happen. Everything goes crazy, and it's a kind of story I wrote and devised based loosely on kind of old-fashioned monster movies and kind of my basic love for old films and things like that. In this scene we have the main character Eddie, this character who is psychic, where they first come face to face with one of the monsters from Eddie's dreams, but this time in the real world. And it's like the problems that Eddie has faced in his past that no one could really understand come into the real world, and the power of those dreams and the fears that he's lived with kind of making an impact in the real world, and the consequences of that. We'll probably see lots of governments and countries kind of like pulling together to kind of rid themselves of the menace of this kind of like uncontrollable monstrous force. But maybe there's only one person that can really solve the world's problems, and it's this guy here. So in this scene we've got Eddie kind of first seeing the monster outside of his dreams in the real world, the monster approaching the school. Here we have a scene where we see from behind and looking down, we see the monster making towards Eddie and his friend as they try to shelter him with the safety of the school. It's also kind of quite influenced by the idea of the id, and also one of my favourite science fiction films, Forbidden Planet, where a spaceship lands on a long lost forgotten planet. The crew start to be attacked by this kind of strange unseen monster, and they like to find out the monster is created by the inhabitant. of the planet, and the film was kind of loosely based on Shakespeare's The Tempest. But it was made in the 1950s, and it's like one of my kind of favourite science fiction films of that period. I like the idea of the fears that we have kind of existing in the real world, and the consequences that that implies, and how we can like try to kind of like confront them. You see right in the distance the small figures of Eddie and his friend as they try to escape from the evil clutches of the monster. The other thing about using computers to scan in your artwork is like when you make mistakes like that, you can just clean them up on the screen. You can also use white paint or whiteout to kind of do that. But as you can see, nobody's perfect and we'll still make mistakes. So we got this monster chasing Eddie and his friend. This monster really is kind of invented in some ways in Eddie's dreams. And it's that idea that, you know, deep in our subconscious we have all these fears and all these kind of worries that kind of take the form of nightmares. And kind of our nightmares can be influenced by anything, I guess, from stuff we see on TV or films, even monster films, and maybe when we're in our dreams we can't always kind of control what's happening. And that was the basic idea for this story. It was like, what would happen if you got rid of those ideas? Yeah. After all these people, could never really understand how you really felt. As a kid, sometimes you feel like that, that no one really understands you. And I can remember that all those years ago myself. And this is a kind of way of like, I just thought it would be an interesting idea if the monsters of your own subconscious, once they kind of left that world, what would happen if they kind of came into the real world, and then everyone could see how horrifying those kind of nightmares could be. And there's the idea that, really when it comes down to it, the only person that can really solve these problems is you, or the person who's having these nightmares. It's that idea of being in control of things. Often when you're a child you don't feel in control of things, or you'd like to feel in control of things. It's all about the struggle of power. And we have it in the adult world, but especially in the kids' world. So that's the basic kind of idea for this story. It's like feeling like you're in control, and then suddenly realising that you're not, but then also feeling like you're responsible for the actions of what happens. So even though Eddie's just a kid of 10 years old or so, he's suddenly thrown into a situation where he has to confront this fear in the real world, and possibly he's the only person that can really control it, and not all the kind of like fighter jets and armies that are sent out to destroy this monster, but him, like a small 10-year-old boy. And will he be able to do it? Because he found it so hard in his own dreams. These pens are pretty good because I can, for the finer detail, I can get smaller nibs that kind of I can add more kind of finer detail, and it's quite good to kind of have a variety of lines sometimes. And the all essential speed lines. The monster smashing the ground, just trying to destroy Ed and his friend, knocking up bits of concrete and school playground. I was talking about the lettering earlier, and here I've got a sound effect. You can just see through the paper. Saying something like kadoom or something. Now you can also draw those, but you could also do them in a computer program. And a lot of artists do that now. So you can just have the artwork separate from the lettering, and you can like resize until you're happy. But yeah, still a lot of people do the old-fashioned way of doing it, which is just as good sometimes, and maybe sometimes better. One of the tips I often use if I'm using a ruler, sometimes to make it not look too kind of boring and clinical, is to vary the line as I'm drawing it, so apply more pressure. So it looks like a proper kind of line. Not like a technical drawing, has a bit more kind of character and depth. If you're really brilliant, you can do it all by hand, but I've never been that hot on straight lines. Things like bricks as well. You just need to kind of hint at the whole brick wall rather than draw the whole thing in. Just so you get an idea. Because if you put too much detail then it will just kind of look too busy and stuff. You don't want it to kind of take away from the action or the main focus of the panel and what's going on.